I think one of the main things that like may really set Bleach apart from like a lot of other shonen is that Ichigo's powers are more of a metaphor than in other shonen. Because like yes, other shows like this is a very like long staple thing about like, oh yeah, you know, you start off as a baby and then you get stronger and learn how to use your powers and now you're an adult, and it's like a metaphor for like growing up. But and like Bleach definitely does do that too, you know, like I think the Soul Society is a parallel for like the real world because like it's confusing and doesn't make a lot of sense and has arbitrary rules and blah blah blah. So there is definitely, and again, Ichigo learns to use powers and mature and, you know, become level-headed. Because, like, the thing that really screws him over in this first arc is him not having a level head. So it's definitely there. But in addition to the whole, like, oh yeah, my powers are part of me growing up, Bleach just kind of takes it a step further. And I think that's, and you can kind of see the start of that here by, like, oh, he has to borrow his powers, like, that's not necessarily something that a lot of like other shows do. Yeah, other like he does have innate power, but like the thing that like brings it out of him like is Rukia. Rukia is the thing that kind of he borrows his powers from Rukia. You know, and already like off the bat, like that really like sets Ichigo aside from like the other shonen protagonists, because like his powers are like borrowed and or like not his in a way. And, like, he kind of has to find a way to, yeah, Ichigo has to borrow Rukia's car for work. That is kind of what I was kind of hinting at. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure what it's supposed to be a metaphor for, but that it is definitely, like, that is a large theme of the series, of, like, Ichigo, not to spoil of any more of the series, but, like, as that goes on, that continues being a reoccurring trend of, like, Ichigo's powers don't feel like his own, and he has to like find balance within himself, and very much like it's based on like Buddhism. I'm dying. Yeah, this also yeah, this whole idea of like Ichigo like borrowing the like Ichigo's powers like aren't his own, and like he needs to find like inner peace within himself and go on like this very spiritual journey is most of what Bleach is about. It's, I mean, other shows, yeah, like in Demon Slayer, he had a whole training arc where he had to like become strong and whatnot, and that's another thing too. But like Bleach is like very like spiritual about it. We'll see like at the beginning of like the next arc, like there's a lot of like meditation training and stuff like that, but no spoils. But I was gonna say also, so this obviously extends to like Ichigo's powers. Like his powers are like a symbol for like trying to find inner peace with himself and like, you know, borrowing other people's powers and like learning how to do things on his own and not rely on other people and blah blah blah. But this also kind of translates to the fights in this show. The fights in this show are also more metaphoric than anything else, because people criticize this show a lot for like doing resolve hacks or whatever. Because they're characters in this, no spoils, but characters in this series often win fights that they're not supposed to. This happened in the first arc too, where like he severely wounded Grand Fisher, who has been evading the Soul Society, who has like 15,000 people who can do things way better than Ichigo. Like he was able to wound him, and he also wounded a Menos Grande. So like, yeah, Ichigo definitely wins fights that he's not supposed to, but like the fight is not necessarily what's the important part. It's more like what the fight symbolizes. Because like most fights in this show are more like tests of like character or like tests of resolve. Going back to that idea of like, you know, everything's like spiritual and everything's like a metaphor. Like the fights, that extends to the fights as well. So basically what I'm trying to say is that I think the way that people look at this show is a little like skewed, because if you look at it like as like a regular ass like battle anime, then like, yeah, people just bring out crap that they don't even know. Like this series is one of the most infamous of just like most fights end with, oh, now I'll show you my real power. But like, you know, getting to that point, it's more about like the emotional and like spiritual battle that's happening in the show than anything else. You know, like whoever has like the better resolve or like the better like spiritual awareness is the one that usually wins the fights. Yeah, there's a question of like, oh, does the series jump the shark and just turn it into like power transformation and you will get more powerful? Like, no, it's not Dragon Ball like super form. It's not like, oh, you just get a super form and you're stronger than your opponent. You know, like, again, the reason that like Renji has that power and Ichigo doesn't is because Renji is more spiritually aware, you know, more developed as a character and like knows is more connected to his Zanpakuto, and Ichigo isn't, you know? So it's not necessarily that, like, oh, he has a power-up that Ichigo doesn't, and that's why he won. It's like, why doesn't Ichigo have that power-up? You get what I mean?
I do.
I'm just trying to, like, again, I'm not necessarily going to change the entire discourse of Bleach Online with this 3-viewer stream, but I do want to just talk about, you know, the fact that like a lot of people like fundamentally misunderstand this series, and that's mostly why it gets hate, and that's the only reason. I mean, listen, show has flaws. No show's perfect, but I think it gets a lot of hate that it doesn't deserve, just because like people are like just don't understand, you know. And I think this fight and the Zanpakuto in general are a very good example of like, yeah, it's not just like a matter of like having powers. It's a matter of like, why do you have that power and like what do you do to get it, you know? So like, yeah. And I on that note, I think the show is very like, it has good theming, because like people aren't like actually fighting with their bodies, right? They're fighting with their spirits, and the kind of like fights reflect that, right? Am I crazy?
I don't think you're crazy, especially if we're just talking. I think this goes more so for the later parts of Bleach, but this early part definitely, at least for the character developments between Ichigo and his friends, I believe.
Yeah, I just don't think it's a coincidence that like a lot of the plot and a lot of like the power development, a lot of like what gets characters stronger, and a lot of like the fights are less down to like raw physical power and more down to like spiritual power. And that's kind of like reflected by the fact that they're not fighting with their bodies, they're fighting with their spirits. So, yes, it's show good, very unique.